Some loves begin with fireworks. Others begin with silence, the kind that settles into daily life like morning mist over a small farm. Diep and James belonged to the second kind. Their love did not shout. It waited, endured, and learned how to breathe between responsibilities. And at the center of that quiet love was Nee. Every morning, the farm woke before the sun. The soil still held the night's coolness as Diep moved between the rows, her hands busy, her thoughts louder than the birds. She greeted the workers with a smile that looked light but carried years of effort. To anyone passing by, she was simply a young woman managing crops and schedules. But inside, she was balancing something far heavier: love, promises, and a child who had already learned what absence felt like. Nee's laughter often arrived before Diep noticed her small footsteps. The girl chased the dog across the yard, tripped, laughed again, and stood up as if falling were just another game. Diep watched her with a tenderness that felt almost painful. Loving a child, she had learned, meant loving without conditions, without guarantees. It meant choosing them again every single day. James usually came quietly too. No grand entrances, no explanations, just the sound of his motorbike stopping at the gate, his figure standing there for a second longer than necessary, as if asking the house for permission to enter. To Nee, he was not a man full of secrets or unfinished battles. He was the one who promised to come back, the one who cooked simple meals and listened seriously to stories that made little sense, the one who knew that keeping a promise to a child was heavier than any business deal. But love, when mixed with responsibility, is never simple. James carried a promise of his own, one that required distance, patience, and silence. Diep understood this more than she wanted to. She protected their love by not asking too much, by standing firm when her heart wanted to run after him. She kept her promise by staying strong, by giving Nee stability even when her own world felt uncertain. At night, when the farm finally rested, Diep would sit near Nee's bed, listening to her slow breathing. Somewhere beyond the darkness, James was fighting battles no one could see. Yet here, in this small, ordinary room, their choices quietly met. One protected love, the other kept a promise, and neither of them was willing to let go of Nee. Life on the farm did not slow down for unanswered questions. Each day arrived with its own list of things that could not be delayed: fruit to be sorted, workers to be paid, meals to be cooked before the sky turned dark. Diep learned to move through these routines with calm determination, as if order itself could keep her heart from shaking. To the outside world, she looked steady. Only when she was alone did the weight of waiting press gently against her chest. Nee sensed everything. Children always do. She noticed when Diep paused longer than usual while staring at the gate, and when James stayed only a little while before leaving again. One afternoon, while Diep was washing vegetables, Nee sat beside her and asked in a voice too soft for her age, "Uncle James will come back tomorrow, right?" Diep did not answer immediately. She dried her hands, knelt down, and smiled. Not the kind that lied, but the kind that promised effort. "He always comes back," she said. And in that moment, she chose to believe it again. James, meanwhile, lived between two worlds. In one, he was a man carrying unfinished conflicts, evidence not yet strong enough, and a father's shadow that refused to loosen its grip. In the other, he was simply Uncle James, the man who knew how Nee liked her rice slightly crispy and who pretended to be surprised every time she counted correctly. The contrast exhausted him, yet it also kept him alive. Whenever doubt crept in, it was Nee's small hand slipping into his that pulled him back. There were nights when James sat alone, staring at his phone, wanting to tell Diep everything, every fear, every plan, every moment he felt close to losing himself. But he stopped. Love, he had learned, was not only about honesty. Sometimes it was about timing. He kept his promise by staying away when staying close could cause harm. It was a choice that hurt, but it was one he made again and again. Back at home, Diep protected their love in quieter ways. She did not allow bitterness to take root. She spoke of James gently, never with blame, especially in front of Nee. She fixed broken fences, planned future harvests, and built a life that did not collapse in his absence. Not because she did not need him, but because she refused to let Nee grow up feeling abandoned. Between waiting and returning, between silence and hope, their love continued to grow. It did not demand certainty. It asked only for faith. And in the rhythm of ordinary days, Diep and James were learning that some promises are not meant to be rushed. They are meant to mature, slowly, with time.
There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any argument. For Diep, those moments often arrived in the late afternoon, when the sun leaned low and shadows stretched across the yard. This was the hour when Nee usually waited by the gate, counting the passing motorbikes, hoping one of them would stop. Each time it did not, her shoulders fell just a little. Diep saw it all, and each time her heart tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned that strength, sometimes, was quiet endurance. James felt that silence too, though he was miles away. The days were filled with meetings, hidden recordings, and carefully measured steps, yet the nights were unbearably still. In those hours, memories returned without permission. Nee laughing with rice on her cheeks, Diep's tired smile after a long day, the simple warmth of a home he could not yet fully claim. He wondered how long love could survive without presence. The question haunted him more than any threat from his father ever had. Then, one evening, the routine broke. Nee suddenly fell ill with a fever that refused to go down. Diep carried her through the night, pressing a cool cloth against her forehead, whispering reassurances she herself desperately needed to hear. At dawn, exhausted and afraid, Diep reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she called James, not as a lover, not as a woman asking for comfort, but as a mother protecting her child. James arrived before the sun fully rose. He did not ask questions, he did not explain. He simply appeared at the door, breathless, eyes full of worry. In that moment, all the distance collapsed. Nee opened her eyes, saw him, and weakly smiled. "You kept your promise," she whispered. James knelt beside her bed, his voice breaking as he answered, "I always will." The fever passed, but something else changed. Diep and James sat together in the quiet aftermath, the kind of quiet that no longer hurt. Diep did not accuse him. James did not defend himself. They spoke of ordinary things, medicine, work, the weather. Yet beneath those words was an unspoken truth. Love had been tested, and it had not failed. That night, as James prepared to leave again, Nee held on to his sleeve. Diep watched them, realizing that love was not only about staying or leaving, it was about returning when it mattered most. And in that fragile balance between absence and presence, she understood something deeply human. Silence can wound, but it can also reveal who we truly are when everything else falls away. Morning arrived softly, as if the world itself did not want to disturb the fragile peace inside Diep's house. The smell of warm rice and boiled eggs filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, the table felt complete. Nee sat between Diep and James, swinging her legs, humming the tune she had learned at school. It was an ordinary scene, so ordinary that it felt precious. Life, Diep realized, was often decided in moments like this, not in storms, but in quiet mornings. James watched them carefully, memorizing every detail. He knew he could not stay long, yet he also knew that leaving without clarity would only reopen old wounds. When Nee ran outside to play, James finally spoke. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of many sleepless nights. He told Diep everything, about his father's cruelty, the pressure, the threats, and the long plan he had been building in silence. He did not ask for forgiveness. He only asked her to understand why he had chosen distance instead of danger. Diep listened without interrupting. There was pain in what she heard, but there was also truth. She realized that love was not always loud or heroic. Sometimes it was stubborn, imperfect, and frighteningly human.
When James finished, she did not cry. Instead, she said quietly, "If you walk this path alone, you will always be half a man. If you walk it with us, it will be harder, but it will be real." That was the moment James made his final choice. He would no longer disappear without a word. No matter how dark things became, he would return, even if only for a short while. Ni was not a promise he could delay, and Diep was not a strength he could borrow without giving himself fully in return. As the sun climbed higher, James prepared to leave again, but this time was different. He knelt in front of Ni and held her hands. "I may go far," he said softly, "but I am never leaving you." Ni nodded, trusting him with the pure certainty only a child can have. Diep stood at the doorway, watching him walk away. Her heart was heavy, yet steady. Love, she understood now, was not about holding on tightly out of fear. It was about choosing each other again and again, even when life demanded sacrifice. And in that quiet village, under an ordinary sky, 2 adults and 1 small child made an unbreakable decision. No cruelty, no pride, and no distance would ever take them away from one another again. This story reminds us that love is not proven by grand promises or dramatic sacrifices, but by responsibility, honesty, and the courage to face difficulties together. James believed that disappearing was the best way to protect the people he loved, yet his silence only created deeper wounds, showing that good intentions are meaningless if they are not communicated. True care requires openness, even when the truth is painful or frightening. Diep's growth teaches another powerful lesson. She began as someone fragile and uncertain, but life shaped her into a woman who could stand firm without losing her kindness. Strength does not mean controlling others or demanding perfection. It means understanding, choosing empathy, and knowing when to speak up. By refusing to abandon James or use Ni as an emotional shield, Diep showed that love must be built on principles, not fear. Ni represents the purest reason adults must learn to change. Children do not need perfect parents. They need presence, consistency, and trust. Every broken promise leaves a mark deeper than adults often realize. James's decision to stop running was not just about love, it was about accountability. When we choose to protect someone, we must also protect their sense of security. Above all, the story teaches that real love does not escape hardship, it walks through it together. Life will always test us with misunderstandings, distance, and painful choices. But when people choose honesty over silence, courage over pride, and unity over loneliness, love becomes something stronger than fate. It becomes a conscious, daily decision.